What's up, Internet? You're tuning in episode 168 of Nintendo Noise, Flip Screen Games' weekly Nintendo podcast. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back to the show, buddy. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a while, and I'm glad to be back for the final Nintendo Noise of 2024.
I know, yeah. If you guys haven't seen the announcement in the Discord, this is going to be our last week of programming for 2024. We are going to do a little grading of Nintendo Switch's final year here on this show. We're going to do TBD on the Steam Deck podcast, and then on Flip Screen Games, we'll go up on Friday, and we'll be breaking down everything that happened at the Game Awards, and that will close us out for the year here on 2024. And we're going to take a couple weeks off so that we can enjoy the holidays and so that we can play all the games that we missed this year that we want to potentially get into for Game of the Year in January when that rolls around for us.
Yeah, I think Max is convinced that something's going to be announced at the Game Awards. So maybe that'll be the Steam Deck podcast anyway. I don't know. I have a feeling that something is going to go tits up there, but we'll see, I guess.
We shall see. It's going to be an interesting one because the Game Awards is kind of, I think, our last chance to gain points for our predictions this year, too. And there's a couple things that we've predicted that could potentially pan out there or not. So we shall see. But so we got a bunch of fun shows planned for you in January when we come back. We're going to take those 2 or so weeks or what maybe it's like 2.5, I forget, so that we can kind of recollect ourselves at the end of the year and come back on the right foot for January. So unfortunately, this is our last Nintendo Noise of the year, but fortunately for you, we got a fun one because we are going to grade Nintendo Switch's final year. Not final year on the market, of course, not the final year that software will come. But this is the last year where the Nintendo Switch is the main event. This is one of the last episodes of this show where Nintendo Switch is the main event.
Yeah, like it's kind of crazy because me and you met pretty early in the Switch's life cycle. That's how we met. We started writing for basically a Switch fan site,
Yeah.
And it's like, it's really cool to kind of have seen its whole journey. But yeah, we know that there is going to be a new Nintendo console next year. It's been confirmed by Nintendo themselves. So obviously this is the Switch's final year. And presumably there will still be a few bits of software coming next year that will be cross-compatible with both platforms.
And I think that'll probably happen even for a couple of years with certain games, maybe not every big release, but like the stuff that's, frankly, the stuff that's on the caliber of like what came out this year, I think is stuff I would probably assume will continue.
You know what? I think you're right. Yeah, like it's kind of all. There's a lot of what I would have previously considered like AA games. Like they're not necessarily like top tier games that you're paying $70 for. They're like kind of a rung or two below that.
I feel like they're the games that came in to replace what used to be their handheld games, right? Like these are the kinds of games you might have gotten on the 3DS or something like that, right? Rather than, the Wii U. And maybe that's a bad comparison. We'll say DS and Wii. And like no shade towards any of these games, just the idea that like they're not on the caliber maybe of something like Tears of the Kingdom, for example, right? Or Smash or Mario Kart, right? Like those big AAA franchises that you kind of have the expectation are going to sell, tens of millions of copies, right? Whereas like these games, they cost less to make. They are allowed to be a little bit more creative, small, outside the box, right? Like they have slightly different expectations.
There's like 3 re-releases this year.
Sure.
It's kind of, it's like, yes, they're remakes, but it's not like they had to start from the ground up. They had like a game that they were essentially cloning and starting again.
Right.
And I think that's fine. I think it's, you either see this with consoles where the final year is just a quiet, this is the last things we had that we want to put out because we're holding the juicy stuff for the new shiny console next year, or you see like a completely fire final year where it's just like, yeah, these are the games that took so long for us to make and we're finally releasing it. And I think if this was last year, if the Switch's final year was last year, which I think it was meant to be, then that would have been a fire year to finish with.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. It would have easily felt like something that was like, how do you top that as a way to go out, right? Because it's like, I think arguably last year was the best year that the consoles had, right? With Tears of the Kingdom, with Mario Wonder, right? Like, and not to mention, right, that like those are games that like are in the franchises that kind of kicked off the console, right? Like the first year was Breath of the Wild and Odyssey, so like kind of seeing that all come full circle, like it felt like the time, you know. And to your point, I think this is like clearly a stopgap year, and not to speak ill of any of the games that came out, but I think when we start getting into how they performed overall, I think you can kind of feel that this is that kind of year. And it's like, you wonder, like, would all these games have come out? Like, if this was a Switch 2's first year, would we have just had like an insane number of games, or were some of these things fast tracked? Like, you have to wonder, like, because we know that Nintendo does this, right? Like, they like develop games, they hold games, they think a lot about the release calendar and like how much marketing bandwidth they have, how many opportunities for a Nintendo Direct there are to talk about a title, things like that. And it was interesting to see like some of these games kind of seemingly come out of nowhere, or not necessarily get shadow dropped, but like get announced and then come out very quickly. And you wonder if some of these things would have. Would something like MEO have come out if they didn't feel like they maybe needed something to fill a gap, right? Or would some of these releases, like the Thousand Year Door remake or something like that, is that something that maybe might have been held for the Switch 2, right? Or was planned for the Switch 2, but then was like, well, let's fast track this guy and get it out so that.
Yeah, I mean, that one could have been, but like, I mean, I still feel that probably would have been a cross-gen release anyway. Whereas I do think next year we are going to see some games for the Switch 2 that are just for the Switch 2, in the same way that for the new Nintendo 3DS we got games that were just for that. But the majority of games, I think, for at least a couple of years are going to be cross-compatible.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm interested to see experience. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm sorry to. I'm sorry. Third time there. I'm interested to see what the timeline is on that. Like, are there one or two big games next year that are exclusive, or do we see something akin to like what we saw on the PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5, where there's like a couple of the like big marquee games are also coming out on Switch, but they just don't perform as well? Like, I'm interested to see like how hard that cutoff point is, because we know what a large install base the Switch has, right? And that it's like, I'm sure for some of these smaller titles, right? Like, if they were only being released on the Switch 2, that they would probably suffer a little bit,
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's the same thing that we saw happen with the PS5, that they kind of, it was inevitable that they had to release some of those games cross-platform, just because that you're leaving, with the case of Nintendo, almost 200 million consoles behind, right? It's like a crazy number, and you can't leave that many potential customers on the floor, because looking at some of the numbers that the games this year made, if that's to an install base of hundreds of millions, if you're looking at an install base of millions instead,
right,
in the first year, you're not going to be saying anywhere near the numbers of copies of software that you need to sell, unless you're pumping out, top tier AAA
big
games,
marquee titles that people are like can't ignore. Yeah, I think there is something to be said about like with the new hardware, there's like shiny new toy syndrome, so people are maybe more willing to like.
I can see that.
Think about like the early days of Switch with games like Snake Pass that were like huge on Switch because everybody just wanted something to play. No disrespect to Snake Pass, but.
Explosion machine game or whatever it was, where it's just you shooting the shapes.
Master Blaster Zero, like stuff like that, where it's like, like we were all we wanted stuff to play on this thing, So
I kind of feel like that's not going to happen second time around, though. I feel like people were in awe of it because it was just like, oh wow, this is the first time I feel like I'm taking a home console with me.
Right.
that was cool 6 years ago, but like in 2025, is it still going to be cool? Like I've had that experience at that point, and other things like the Steam Deck is now on the market. I think it's cool, but
I don't know. I mean, like, you're right
know
that
that I'm going to be looking for it because I've got such a huge backlog of Switch games I can play on my new device anyway.
you're right that the novelty is going to be different, and that, like, the fact that there will be, like, backwards compatibility with the eShop, right? Theoretically, that it's like, well, there's not that scarcity, right? But if they're switch to exclusive games, I think that maybe still applies, just because, I mean, like, I don't know. It's like, that's like saying, like, was the PlayStation 5 less exciting because you had a PlayStation 4? It's like, no, you were excited because it was something new, right? And it's like, you want to play new stuff on it. And
there definitely was the conversation of, well, what's the point of me buying one because I can already play Horizon on my PS4 Pro?
yeah, but that is a conversation. But I feel like if we're being honest with ourselves, the people having that conversation were people that didn't buy the PlayStation 5 at launch, and a lot of people bought it at launch. It's, you know, up until very recently, its sales were insane, right? And like the demand was through the roof. So like, you know, not to like discount that opinion, but it's one of those things of like, I feel like to me that feels like the same kind of opinion that people had about the Switch Lite. Where, like, I remember we had people commenting on our old podcast being like, who's this for? What an insane decision.
That was for kids. That was clearly for kids.
Right. But that's my point, right? It's like,
that.
I think early adoption of a new console is for enthusiasts, right? And for people who, like, have shiny new toy syndrome and are like, I'm in the mood for something new. I haven't bought a new console in 4 years, right? Or like, I haven't bought a new console since the Switch. That's like 8 years, right? And it's like, okay, you know, it's like there are a lot of people that are excited to jump on at a new hardware generation and get into a new library. I think that there is something to be said for that as an opportunity for new games at the beginning of a life cycle, but I do see your point that it's not going to be the same situation as it was with the Switch, where there were
I think it's
3 games on the eShop that you could download, right?
And I think it's probably going to be a similar experience as to when I got my Xbox Series X, in that there weren't that many new games for me to play, but I was really excited to get to see, oh, how's this going to look with like frame rate boost? And is this going to play better? Because we've heard that in those behind closed doors tests, they showed Breath of the Wild running at like 4K 60. I want to know what that hardware can do. It's presumably going to have some kind of boost mode, some kind of like mode where I can eke out a little bit more performance from these games. And if not, maybe I've got to pay a £10 upgrade to get them. But if there's a game that I've not played since the launch year, like Mario Odyssey, and I want to go back and I want to play that, and it looks better and it plays better, then that's another reason for me to go back and try it. I've got new hardware. I don't necessarily need all new games.
Yeah, I guess it'll be interesting to see how that pans out, because that was obviously such a really powerful thing in the early days of the Nintendo Switch, and like how like putting your indie game out on there was like such a gold mine in those early days, and it would be kind of nice to get a bit of a reset on that, but maybe we're past that with Nintendo, since it does seem like we're going to maybe be moving into the kind of like one library consolidated that moves with you forever from now on, right? But I guess we'll see. Yeah. So let's get into the software itself this year, because I didn't think of this as a soft year going into this conversation, but I was kind of struck by how many games actually came out.
Yeah, there's volume, but I don't necessarily think that there's a lot of quality, to put it bluntly. Like, there's a lot of, I think, filler games that are just like, we've got this, we might as well put it out.
It's a very like middle of the road kind of year, you know, like just to take you through. So we have 9 games and then 2 like side
projects.
Yeah, like side projects, like hardware, software releases that were like things that you do in a soft year, you know.
Yeah, I mean they launched a theme park as well, so like they've been doing some things, I guess.
Yeah. Like they're also working on the next Mario movie, right? Like it's like we know what they're doing. Like they're working on what the next chapter is, and they're trying to, as we've said for like the last couple months, right? Like trying to like get that last bit of juice out of the Switch that they can, right?
Mm-hmm.
Try to pump those numbers up before you switch over, pun not intended, to the next generation. So let's just go through the games real quick. So we got Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Princess Peach Showtime, Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door remake, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, another remake, Nintendo World Championships NES Edition, Emio: The Smiling Man, Famicom Detective Club, The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom, Super Mario Party Jamboree, and Mario and Luigi Brothership. And then we also have Nintendo's Sound Clock, Alarmo, and then Nintendo Music, which was an app that both came out this year as well. So with regard to the hardware stuff, right? Like it's like, or like Nintendo Music, those to me both very much feel like the kind of like silly side projects that you give attention to in a year where you don't have a ton to talk about, right? Because like we talked about like how thoughtful they are about release calendars and giving oxygen to the right things at the right time or whatever, and it's just like,
I really think Nintendo Music is only exists because they had nothing else to get us to resub. Literally, nothing else as a motivation to resubscribe other than, oh yes, we've taken all of our music off of YouTube now, and so
now you can pay for it.
So now you can pay for it because we're not going to allow anyone to upload it there anymore, and we're not going to monetize it there. You've got to pay us a monthly subscription in order to listen to it on an app that's sort of like Spotify but not quite as good, and you kind of wish we just put it there instead.
Yeah, it would be nice to have the option. But I mean, it's a very Nintendo thing to do, to take something that people have been asking for years and then do it in a way that they don't really want,
Yeah, right. Like I don't, I have playlists that are like video game music and I want some Nintendo songs in there. I use YouTube Music. They used to be in there. They're no longer in there. They've been like removed, and it's like this has been taken down by the copyright holder. And I'm just like, brilliant. Okay, so now my crafted playlist of my favorite video game music no longer has any of the songs I actually want to listen to.
Yeah, it's tragic. So Nintendo Music. But yeah, so the games themselves, when I did a little digging into like just how each of these games kind of performed overall, because I mean, transparently, right, like, for you and I and the rest of the team, I think this was probably the year that we were the most disconnected from our Switches, I
don't think I've turned it on this year. I'll to be perfectly honest, I've not played a single one of these games. I plan on playing Mario Party Jamboree, but I've not played any of the others.
The only one I got into this year was Thousand Year Door, which I enjoyed. But yeah, it's like, I think for me it was kind of a mixed bag of like reasons of why that happened. I think some of these games came out at a time where there was another game I was more interested in, and like they kind of just just they didn't catch my attention as much as the other game that I wanted to play. Or in some cases it was like a financial reason where it's like, this is similar to what happened to me during the Wii U generation, where it's like some of these middle of the road games come out and it's like, I don't really have $60 to spend on this game right now versus, $70 on a game that I'm a lot more interested in, that I think I'll get more out of. Right. So I and I think like that's kind of seems like the vibe that most of us, in the audience, the Nintendo Switch audience, like seem to have, right? Like, just going through some of the stats on these, right? Like Mario vs. Donkey Kong came out in February, has a 76 on Metacritic, and it had 1.12 million sales reported as of their May sales call earlier this year. Princess Peach Showtime was the next one, came out in March, 74 on Metacritic, 1.22 million copies as of that same report. Paper Mario: Thousand Year Door, 88 on Metacritic, that was a good one, 1.94 million copies as of November. Luigi's Mansion 2, 77 on Metacritic, 1.57 million shipped as of November. Nintendo World Championships has a 73 on Metacritic. I couldn't find any sales data for it, which means that it didn't cross that one.
Didn't do well.
Yeah, that 1 million mark is usually where Nintendo bothers to give a game a pat on the back, and this one obviously didn't cross that threshold. Emio: The Smiling Man, Famicom Detective Club, same vibe, released on August. This one's got a 74 on Metacritic. No sales data available for that one. Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom was another success. That was September 26th. 85 on Metacritic, 2.5 million as of November, which is really good for a title that only came out like a month earlier. Like Link's Awakening sold sitting around 6.46 million as of right now, roughly. So yeah, that's like pretty good. Like that's a solid win for the year. And then Mario Party Jamboree, 82 on Metacritic. Only came out in October, so we don't really have like hard data about it. It hasn't hit 1 million yet, so it's obviously not like a super fast seller, but it was the best-selling game on the console in the US the month it came out. So it seems like, and it reviewed really well too. 82 on Metacritic. It's the highest rated Mario Party game on OpenCritic as well, which I thought was interesting.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, so that's one that I think, has the potential to have a longer tail, and I could see people buying that when Switch 2 comes around and they're looking for new things to play. So that game probably still has some life in it as well. But again, right, like it came out in October and like it didn't cross 1 million in that first month, or at least not by the November quarterly report. So it's like, it's not the best. And then Mario and Luigi Brothership was another kind of middle of the road one. November 7th, 77 on Metacritic. So like, and again, too new for us to have like hard numbers about it, but they'd be banging their chest if it was like a huge success, right? So it's like you look at these games and it's like 3 out of the 9 games had higher than a 79 on Metacritic, right? Which is
great. You break into the 80s, you've got a really good game. I think in the 70s you've got a good game. It's like above average. It's in the, like, they've not released a bad game this year.
It's just I think they released a lot of perfectly fine games, or games that are like maybe a little niche, right? And
I think there's a lot of fan service this year, which I think is the right time to do it towards the end of
console that's generation. A good point.
Like, who's really into Nintendo World Championships NES Edition? It's the hardcore Nintendo fans who are just like, oh shit, yeah, I remember that cartridge. I remember the history and the legacy and everything about it. I want to get that. MEO is a new Famicom Detective Club game. You kind of really need to know what they are before you kind of get invested in them. And that had a really weird marketing beat behind it, where it's just like,
so odd.
It's this creepy video that we've posted and we're not going to tell you anything about it. And then it turns out to be a Famicom Detective Club game. It looked like a survival horror game. And I think a lot of people were excited for it to be that, for it to then become a Famicom Detective Club game.
Yeah, definitely. Which I think is, those are games that like I also think they probably didn't expect to be, like you said, like they're for like a specific audience. They probably cost very little to produce, right? So it's like fair play, right? Like that's all good, right? And I think that's like true for like a lot of these games where it's like stuff like Luigi's Mansion 2 and Thousand Year Door, right? Like those are games that like probably did not cost a lot to produce.
Yeah, I mean, Luigi's Mansion 2 was a 3DS game. They probably got Grezzo to do the port, similar to some of the work they've done and porting other games over to the Switch. So I would imagine that it's they just ported the engine, ported the game, jazzed up the graphics a little bit. It's not a lot of stuff that needs to be done there, really. Yeah, you probably need to you needed to change the control schemes a little bit, but it's not like a new Luigi's Mansion game. It's not Luigi's Mansion 3. It's nowhere near that level.
Right. It's you're not going through the process. It's like what they did with like Naughty Dog with like The Last of Us Part 1, right? Where it's like, yeah, like this is like an easy project to like put people on while you're ideating the next big thing, because it's like it just simply doesn't take, if you have a group of developers, right, who are like, sitting around waiting for the next project, why not throw them on a remake that you can spin out in a year and change, right? Rather than, or maybe even 2 or 3 years, depending on the scope of it, but like, half the time of a new game, right? So it's like the expectations for it are much lower. So, but again, it's like, so you look at all this, right? Like I tallied up all the numbers that we have that are confirmed by Nintendo, and you're looking at 8.43 million combined sales. Now, if you assume that Jamboree is going to like perform on the upper echelon of these titles and like, could maybe hit like 2 to 3 million, right? Like we'll say 3 million just to like overinflate the numbers. Let's assume Brothership crosses the 1 million mark, right? That's another 4 million. With MEO and NES like seemingly being underperformers, like let's be generous and say that combined they had 750,000, right? Then assume that all the games that were released earlier this year sell another 750,000 copies each, right? And your absolute best case scenario, and that's making a lot of positive assumptions, inflating the numbers a little bit, 15 million units from Nintendo developed games is kind of
not a lot, isn't it? It's not a lot at all.
Compare it to last year, Super Mario Brothers Wonder alone has 13.44 million sales.
Yeah.
Tears of the Kingdom was 20 plus million. So, and obviously, like we said, like those are bigger marquee titles. They took longer to make. They cost more to make. I don't think that there's the expectation that these games are going to hit those kind of numbers, but yeah, hell of a drop off, right? Like, and that, I think that does kind of paint a picture of like, I think just a general lack of enthusiasm for what they had to offer this year. And again, not to say that any of these games are bad. I know that there are plenty of people in the community that, liked a few of these games, right?
Yeah, but no one's really shouting from the rooftops and going, "Oh, I'm so excited about, the stuff that's come out this year."
There's no Game of the Year contender on this list, right?
Yeah, there is not, no. I mean, they've been nominated in the family category, as they always are, but they're not nominated in any other category, which is rare for Nintendo. And I'm not surprised by it, because there's nothing really groundbreaking this year.
Yeah, at this point, I think it's very clear that what we're doing is holding on.
They're just treading water at this point to just be like, let's get the whole pipeline out. We've got one more game in January with Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. Let's get that out. And then I think it probably will be, right, the holiday season's over. We've released all of the Switch games we had in the pipeline that were kind of Switch only, and now we're on to the Switch 2. And I'm excited for it. I really am excited for it to finally have some fresh hardware.
Yeah, and very much like I'm looking forward, as much as I am looking forward to new hardware, I'm more looking forward to a refreshed like status quo for all of the franchises, and being like, okay, great, like we did all of those last gen, now it's time for another 3D Mario. It's time for another, whatever.
Yeah, right? I'm looking forward to another 3D Mario.
Another Mario Kart.
Another Mario Kart would be great. I wouldn't mind another Animal Crossing, but I don't think that we need one. But I would always love a new. I mean,
we'll get one that there'll be one. It's just a matter of like when it comes. It's like I don't know that I need one like right now, but No,
you got to wait for the next pandemic to have one of those.
Oh my God! Don't even put that in. Don't even put that out into the world. Although, I mean, we had a lot of fun on Twitch back in those days.
Yeah. Do you think we're going to get a lot more third-party input as well? Because that was very important in the first year. It's like we've got Bethesda, we've got Skyrim. You know, Rockstar finally came to Nintendo's platforms for the first time. It's like we've got these games coming. Do you think we're going to continue with that? Do you think there was that rumor that Far Cry 7 or whatever it is would be a launch title? Going to be a launch title for it?
I don't know. I like yes and no. I think it's going to be one of those things where, like, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens at the beginning of the generation again, the same way it does with every Nintendo generation, where they're like, this time we got third-party support figured out. And then it's like, yeah, no, you don't, though, right? Like, it's never been the same since, arguably since PlayStation, right? So I don't necessarily think that this is going to be the generation where you can play every big third-party game on your Nintendo console forever. But the idea that like there will be a point during the beginning where you can for a few years while you're able to kind of bridge the gap between the power of the Nintendo Switch 2 and PS5 and Xbox or whatever. The only thing that I would potentially, it's like obviously you talked about like the frame generation stuff that we know about, so there's that element to it, and the fact that like the console is coming out halfway through these consoles' life cycles, that like maybe that
it could be that we can get that kind of caliber of like early next gen games on here. But to be honest, I kind of feel like they've got to be targeting Unreal Engine 5 to run on the Switch too, because otherwise, just what are you doing? Like that is going to be the de facto
right.
game engine moving forwards, and it needs to work.
And,
So
yeah, and maybe there's the question there of like, if you can get it working, then can you not just have lower resolution versions of most games?
low res versions, turn off stuff like Nanite and all that, and Lumen and all of that stuff, and just have like a lower quality version. But at least it runs. It's there. It's on your platform, and those games could potentially become cross-platform again, and we could get a game that releases on Xbox at the same time as it releases on PlayStation and Switch
like
too.
maybe, and again, like maybe that'll be a thing, but my gut feeling is that it'll be similar to what it's been the last couple of years, where there will be a few notable third-party games that come out particularly early on, while the bigger publishers kind of are like, is there money to be made here? Can we, but eventually they'll get tired of putting out a Nintendo specific version of games because there's not a big return and they don't run as well. And it's like we've seen this play out so many times at this point. It's like it's been this way since the GameCube, right? It was like the last time that there was like parity between the consoles to some degree. And it's just I don't see it happening. Like and again, I've been wrong before, but it's like the Nintendo Switch was a major step forward, and even it didn't really clear that bar, right? Like, it's like, you had, like, you mentioned Skyrim. Skyrim was, like, already a very old game by the time it was a Switch game, right? Like, it's like the big notable third-party examples are pretty much all old games. And
yeah, but I'm thinking, like, could you get something like Red Dead Redemption 2 running on there? We've got Red Dead Redemption on the Switch. Can we get the second one? I think that probably would be a good contender to release there.
That's also a last-gen game. So it's like, I think that's reasonable, for sure.
But I think most of the current gen games that people would be interested in playing and would want to play, they probably would come. Like, I think, say, like the Star Wars games, Jedi Fallen Order, I think that could probably come over. I think, other than that,
maybe.
I think they're probably games made by PlayStation and Xbox themselves, and they're unlikely to be ported and brought over. Because we've seen in the last generation, just studios get swallowed up left, right, and center by the other two companies. There's very few third parties around. I mean, it's probably only going to be Ubisoft and EA games, and
it's like
that's about it.
Ubisoft is very likely to get acquired, in the next maybe couple years anyway.
Which is crazy. And then you're left with EA and Embracer Group.
Yeah,
that's a scary thought.
This is what I've been saying this for years, right? That like this is where we're going. It's the exact same thing that happened in Hollywood. It's the same thing that happens in pretty much every industry after a boom and then a truncation period. It's gonna happen. But I think that's like there's also the reality that like when that happens, there will be space for other smaller companies to come up and try to, make their own fortune.
Yeah, you'll see Devolver probably move out of just publishing indie games into publishing like
AA, we're already kind of seeing that, right? And it's like they're a publicly traded company now. Like they're not exactly the little guy anymore. It's like they just represent the little guy, and it's like
Annapurna's gone though.
That was wild. We never even got to talk about that on the show.
That was crazy.
It happened
we should really do like a in January stories we missed.
Just like a what the fuck? Like it's like that's crazy, man. It's wild. So I mean, and that's the thing. Like that's the reality of where we're at. Like we are entering a very dangerous period, right? Where it's like there's less money to go around, there's less money for like risky little indie titles, and you're seeing the avenues for AA games and the like smaller like budget stuff like kind of dry up, and it's everything is either a huge blockbuster or a tiny indie, and they need to have these pretty insane metrics of success to really be profitable. I mean, like that's just the reality of where we are. So it's like when it comes to Nintendo, I think you'll see some of that stuff. I think there's a chance that you're right and that it'll be a lot more of a part of the ecosystem this generation because there's more parity between the hardware, because all these other things that we outlined. And I think that if there is anything beyond the ability to kind of like make a cheap version of a game for Switch 2, that you will probably struggle to maintain third-party support, and that it's going to be a console that's, again, defined by Nintendo's own software and indies and, smaller studios, double A's, like, those kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
Just because, at the end of the day, like, AAA is about cutting edge, right? Like, that's the whole kind of thing, is like it's supposed to be about pushing boundaries and bigger and more and flashier, and there's a chance that we're going to be moving away from that a little bit in the next couple of years.
I really hope so.
I think
the bubble's got to burst on that at some point,
and I think we're there. Like, we've been like PlayStation's talking about profitability and all this stuff. It's like you could make Spider-Man 2 for less money.
Honestly, it's diminishing returns at this point.
Yeah.
I look at the PS5 Pro comparisons and I'm just like, you know what? I don't need to spend another $700. And I am so surprised at me saying that, because I used to be the kind of person who always wanted to be on the bleeding edge and have the latest console and stuff. And it's just like, it gets to a point where it's just like, I just want to play the game and it looks good enough, and that's fine. And I think other developers need to start taking pages out of Nintendo's book, because they have been able to eke out so much out of really, really old hardware at this point.
Yeah.
It's like a 15-year-old chip.
I think when you look at what they were able to achieve with Tears of the Kingdom and sell that game for $70 and have it compete with games that are on much more bleeding edge type, it's like, why is that
it's
what
like
you're
you can
chasing?
make a good game without it having to look like you're playing a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes I want it to look like I'm playing a movie. If it's a very narrative driven game, you bet I want that. But I'm always going to take frame rate over graphics.
Well,
every single time.
And I think to that point, though, right? It's like there are endless examples, and I feel like we're picking on Sony's games a little bit, but it's like, again, I think you could make, like, you're telling me you can't make Spider-Man 2 for $150 million instead of 200, right? And it's like, and that makes it more profitable, right? Like, you're telling me that you can't, like something like Last of Us 2, right? Where it's like, we've talked about how it's like, that third act's a little bit long in the tooth, though, right? So it's like, so what if we cut 15 hours from the game? How much less does it cost then? And it's
like, cut the 15 hours and then do it as a DLC and charge an extra $30 for the DLC later, and then it's a $100 game instead of a $70 game.
Yeah. Like something like that, right? I just feel like there are examples of how, like, what Nintendo did with Tears of the Kingdom is like a shining example of how, like, it doesn't need to be done the way it is. But I think that as long as that is the expectation and the status quo, I struggle to see. But I don't know. I guess to your point, though, it's also like, what games are we even talking about at this point? Because it's like, I don't know, like the next FromSoft game, maybe. Yeah, maybe that could work, right? Like that ran on Steam Deck.
Aren't they about to buy FromSoft?
Oh, right. PlayStation might be buying them. You're so right.
So it's like Sony's about to buy FromSoft. So that's
man. I don't know. I think the more I think about it, the answer is no. It's not going to be a big relevant part of it, because for all the reasons we said, and also like how many third parties are there even left at this point?
I mean, you got Capcom. I guess is the Japanese side of things, like Capcom.
Yeah, but those guys already all make games for Nintendo anyway. So it's like, sure.
Yeah, it's like, oh, there's a new Monster Hunter. That's probably going to be on Switch too. It's like, oh, cool.
So, like, yeah, that stuff will keep happening. But that's kind of my point anyway, right? Is like, those are like, they're not, it's not Monster Hunter World, right? Like that was like that's.
But it could be, and we know the next Monster Hunter has been announced, but it's not been announced for Nintendo's consoles yet. I could easily see that one be coming to Nintendo's consoles.
Maybe again, it's really hard to say until we really see the hardware in action and like what frame generation is capable of and like how much.
I don't even think it needs to be frame generation. That chip's still going to be more powerful. It's probably going to be as powerful as a PS4 Pro on its own, just in terms of the actual horsepower it can put out. You combine that with DLSS and frame generation and anything else that NVIDIA has cooked up behind the scenes that we don't know about, and the fact that Nintendo can seemingly eke so much out of it by just, I don't know what they do, but they just are able to optimize beyond belief. Like, we've seen some incredible ports even from third-party studios that I didn't think would have been possible.
Like
Doom, Outer Worlds, Doom. Some of those ports were just crazy, and they worked
And I think
well
that's the thing, though, right? It's like
hardware.
that took effort and time, and what was the return on that investment? Was it a lot? Because I think the answer is like probably no. Because I think that most people that want to play the kinds of games that you are like talking about buy a PlayStation or an Xbox to play those games, and they buy a Nintendo console to play Nintendo games and indies and other stuff. And I think that, yeah, like there are gamers that exist who don't own another console and only play on Nintendo and would love to have access to those games, but are there enough of them to support the effort required to make a proper port of those games? And that's where I think it comes back to ease of the port. If it is as easy
I think
as...
so, yeah. I think it has to be easy. It has to be like we see, it's like fucking Clippy comes up in the corner. It's like, oh, we see you're making an Unreal Engine 5 game. Would you like to turn on Nintendo Switch 2 for this? And you click yes, and it's done.
Right.
Like it needs to be, it will probably be as close to easy as that. But I also think the Switch 2 benefits from devices like the Steam Deck existing because studios are already putting games out on PC that they want to be able to target the lowest common denominator, which has become the Steam Deck because it's so popular and it's why people want to play their PC games. And people have spoken about how they'll pick up a game if it is Steam Deck verified or whatever. If the games run on the Steam Deck, they're presumably going to run on the Switch too. I can see that the hardware is probably going to be similarly matched in terms of horsepower, and I would imagine the Switch 2 probably outperforms it in places just because of the technology that it's got with NVIDIA on their side. So I think probably third-party support lasts a little bit longer than it did on the Switch, but you never know because it could be that the PS6 comes out or whatever Xbox is doing, and that all goes out the window because the next generation Unreal Engine 6 is just too much. It's insane, and it can't run on these handheld devices.
Yeah, and I think that's where you come into the point of like, for the first couple years, it'll probably be fine because the parity between, like, to your point, like the low end of like PS4 Pro level accelerated by DLSSR. Every time I say it, I want to say DLSR, like a camera, and it's like I have to really think about it. Yeah, so I think like that will probably close that gap for a couple years, but I think there's also like the quote unquote problem of the fact that because we're already through this generation as much as we are, that now is probably the point where you're going to start getting the games that are actually taking better advantage of the hardware because they've been developed with this hardware in mind, not, oh, they were kind of developed on the last gen and then they got a next gen version, quote unquote next gen like version, right? Like something like Elden Ring, which is like it's a PS4 game, you just played it on PS5, right? Like, or whatever.
Yeah, I can't imagine playing that game on PS4 or on Xbox One. Like, it would have been a disaster.
And like a bunch of people did though, right? So
yeah.
it's one of those things of like, okay, sure, so like that's all well and good, but like how many
I also think
those games are left now that we're 5 years into this? So it's like, again, are we getting a bunch of ports of old games or like games that are like...
I think so. I think we're going to get a bunch of ports of old games, and I think people won't care. I think they'll be happy. They'll be like, oh, you know what? I could play Elden Ring on this now. Great. Sure.
Yeah.
I'll play Elden Ring on it. Oh, cool. I can play Red Dead Redemption 2. Yeah, I'll play that. I'll play the games that I maybe started but didn't finish. Can I play, the next Persona? Can I play Metaphor on this? Because I don't think that's out. Metaphor out on Switch?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so can I play Metaphor on this? Because it's probably gonna come, So there's a bunch of games that I could see being ported, and I do think putting a team on just like putting a porting team together to bring all these games over, it's got to be cheaper than developing fresh new games. Like, let's bring all the Resident Evil games over and actually have them play on device now rather than a cloud variant.
Yeah,
and Capcom will make a decent chunk.
Yeah, and like I'm sure you'll see stuff like that, right? I wouldn't be surprised something like the Mass Effect Legendary, like stuff like that, right? It's like, yeah, sure, like maybe some of those games will come over, but yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see, buddy.
Yeah, exciting times. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to 2025. I think it's going to be a good year for Nintendo and for games in general, because this year was a bit of a dud. I think if I'm ranking it, I'm probably giving it a C. I don't know about you.
Yeah, like I think that's where it's very middle of the road. It's a very like, yeah, like this was again, it's like if you're grading it on like letter grades, it's like a C feels great because it's like this was satisfactory, right? Like it's like you sure attended this year, Nintendo. Good job. And yeah, I think you're right. I do think like broadly this year kind of felt that way a little bit because of the hangover from last year of like how the highs that had and like how we just kind of have had more of the like consolidation and layoffs and like not the same level of like, oh my God, look at these releases, you know? And it's like, it does give you that sense of like, oof, like it sure would be nice. It sure would be nice for Nintendo to come out with something that like feels like it has the same impact that Breath of the Wild did when it came out.
Yeah, definitely. I think they will. We'll just have to wait and see what it is. Maybe it's Metroid.
Maybe it is. Wouldn't that be something? Oh my God, what a timeline for Max. Well, folks, if you want to let us know what you think of Nintendo's 2024, do you agree with our letter grade of a C? Do you think that this year was better? Should we play some of the games on this list that we missed that maybe are better than the general reception, implies, right? I'm interested to hear from you folks. I know several of you got pretty chummy with some of these games and had a great time. So certainly no shade at any of these releases, but I think when you're stacking up this year to the absolute A+ that was last year, it really feels like we're long in the tooth, you know? And I'm excited to get to January and beyond when hopefully we will get, some announcements, some trailers, some stuff that really makes us feel excited about this next generation in a way that's tangible, in a way that's not just like us prognosticating about what it might be, right? And it's like, here are these things that we are imminently excited for. It's going to be a fun time for the show. But thank you guys for joining us here for this week's show. Thank you for joining us for another year of Nintendo Noise. Thank you for tuning in, showing your support, being in the Discord, writing into the show, however you choose to get involved. We thank you for being in the audience and for spending another wonderful year here at Flip Screen Games. Thank you all so much for your support. I hope you have a happy holiday. I hope, whatever it is that you celebrate, I hope that you are doing it with people that you love, that love you, and that you get to play some good video games in the meantime. Now you say stuff.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. It's 11 p.m. I'm very tired, and it's the end of the year, and I'm glad that we can finally play some video games. And very, very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone listening.
All right, everybody. Thank you guys for joining us. We love you. We'll see you next year. Go tune into the other shows this week. Bye.